for watching. Well, the newly minted Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing is getting right down to work. After a decade on the backbenches, Bill Morrow was appointed to cabinet this week. Dennis Ward has more on what the minister is expecting in the role.
Municipal Affairs and Housing Minister Bill Morrow says he's hitting the ground running in his new post and admits there's a lot to get up to speed on. But as the former parliamentary assistant to former Minister Linda Jeffrey, Morrow does have a grasp on what his role is. The Thunder Bay Atikokan MPP doesn't feel the workload will take away from work in his riding, but Morrow is hesitant to say sitting at the cabinet table will help him champion local issues in a bigger way.
To say yes to that would be saying that, perhaps the last 10 years you haven't been as effective as you might otherwise have been, and I don't agree with that. I could draft a long list of things I think I've been able to advance on behalf of my constituents. So will it enhance it? I could certainly say it's not going to hurt it.
There are some who say Morrow's appointment to cabinet is pure politics and about shoring up this seat in the next provincial election. Morrow says comments like that just come with the territory.
They make me smile when they say it. I guess if they're going to say that this decision was made for that reason, you could say that there's been several dozen decisions that we've made in terms of supporting Northern Ontario and Thunder Bay Atikokan for the same reasons. So in that context, I think it doesn't really hold much water.
Morrow is excited to represent 440 plus municipalities in his new role, but with a northern lens. One thing he says he's really looking forward to is taking on more of a role in question period. Dennis Ward, TBT News.
A boil water advisory due to frozen pipes in Kenora was revoked on Thursday after 27 days. Nearly 250 water lines have frozen across the city since early February. Crews have been working 7 days a week and are beginning to overcome the crisis. But as John Thompson reports, the thaw will come at a high cost.
Kenora's boil water advisory ended a day shy of 4 weeks, and the home that had gone the longest without water at all has been dry since February 10th. The city's water system is frozen in 247 places, including 22 breaks on 7 mains. This chunk came from a water main in Keewatin, which had frozen solid. The frost in the ground even crawled into the new line on Main Street, which was installed in 2008. After over a month of dedicating the entire roads, water, and sewer staff to the task, Operations Manager Rick Perchuk says his team is finally in what he calls positive days, meaning they're thawing more lines than they're receiving new calls.
No, I've been with the city 35 years, and by far this is the worst we've experienced in the number of thaws. We've experienced a lot of thaws, but never the number of breaks and main freeze-ups. We've had approximately 7 mains that have froze, and they've resulted in a number of homes that on the whole street that have been without water, and a lot of damage caused to the distribution system.
Kenora's 2014 budget passed on Monday with a 2.3% tax increase, but no money was allocated to what will be a monumental infrastructure deficit come spring. At least 430 meters of pipe will have to be replaced, not including 13 dead-end mains. Rod McKay is the city councillor overseeing public works. He intends to approach the Ministries of Municipal Affairs and Housing as well as infrastructure to fix the city's pipes by tapping into Ontario's funding flow.
The plan is to repair what we have to. We're certainly going to try to talk to the provincial government about getting some help with that, because it's really almost like a city disaster. So we're trying to get some disaster relief to come up with some funding to offset the cost of that maintenance. It's going to be huge for us this year.
Perchuk credits not the warming weather for the turnaround, but citizens complying with city pleas to ensure their pipes are regularly heated by running their taps. Since metered water billing was introduced in 2002, residents have cut their water consumption in half. And as the weeks of minus 40 Celsius temperatures wore on, the water, like Kenora's water problem, continued to expand. John Thompson, TBT News.
One man is dead following a 2-vehicle mishap near Dryden. OPP say the incident occurred on Highway 17 just east of Erin Provincial Park around 7:30 in the morning on Thursday when a passenger vehicle and a commercial vehicle collided. The victim has been identified as 24-year-old Taylor Gardner of Dryden. The driver of the second vehicle was not injured. Well, it's being hailed as a historic agreement that will move the Ring of Fire mining development ahead. After nearly a year of negotiations, the province and the 9 Matawa First Nation chiefs have signed a regional framework agreement. And as Dennis Ward reports, it's believed the deal ensures communities nearest to the Ring of Fire will benefit from the development.
To reach this point today is a landmark. It is historic.
Michael Gravel says the regional framework agreement that's been signed lays out the priorities to move the Ring of Fire forward. The deal was signed in a private gathering on Wednesday, and the next phase of negotiations are expected to start immediately. One of the 6 items the province and First Nations will work together on is resource revenue sharing.
And I think that will be one of the first items that will be part of the Phase 2 discussions. Regional infrastructure supports, capacity building for the First Nations. There certainly is a very real interest, if not concern, that indeed that there's an enhanced environmental assessment process, that the First Nations have a significant role in playing and participating in that process.
Martin Falls Chief Eli Munoz has gone from putting up blockades a few years ago to adding his name to the agreement. He feels this deal ensures the 9 Matawa communities are more directly involved in the Ring of Fire. It will address environmental concerns and infrastructure needs. In the long term, Munoz feels there will also be jobs during construction and when the mines are operational. For him, this is about a brighter future.
Have our people be employed, be trained and employed, and get ambition into the communities, instead of not seeing the future the way it's been for a long time in the reserves. So I think it's a good opportunity to look into the future.
Well, the signing took place behind closed doors here at the Da Vinci. An official celebration is in the works and expected to take place early next month. Dennis Ward, TBT News.
One of the mining companies active in the Ring of Fire is happy to see all 9 Matawa chiefs sign the framework agreement with the province. It's a move that some believe will move the Ring of Fire development forward. Mo Levine of KWG Resources believes the agreement is one of the milestones needed to be able to move mining projects forward. He feels the deal between the chiefs and the province is a necessary foundation for everything else to happen.
And hopefully it's the part of the foundation that's needed for the Ontario government to sit down with the First Nations and start planning regional infrastructure. Without a government commitment to regional infrastructure, it's very unlikely that any of the projects in the Ring of Fire will move forward.
KWG believes a rail line is the only feasible way to move chromite deposits out of the proposed mining site. However, the company is supportive of roads to connect the northern communities. Officials from Noront Resources issued a statement. President Alan Coote says they are pleased and encouraged by the signing, and the company expects that mining development will now move forward in a timely fashion. Well, after a 2-week trial, a Thunder Bay jury found 35-year-old Kesley Jacob not guilty of manslaughter in the death of 53-year-old Barney Beaver. The Webequie First Nation resident died after an altercation at a hotel in December of 2011, and Jacob from Summer Beaver spent almost a year in prison before he was released on bail. As Courtney Rutherford tells us, Jacob couldn't wait to leave the courthouse and start his new life as a free man.
Well, my client's probably a little too emotional for words right now, but he is relieved that for the last 2 years, more than 2 years now, he's lived with this. He's glad that it's over, and in his own words, he's just happy to go back on with his life.
Kesley Jacob is a free man. The 12-person jury found Jacob not guilty in the death of Barney Beaver. Jacob, along with his family, breathed a sigh of relief upon hearing the news and grabbed each other with tears in their eyes. The jury deliberated for just 1 hour and 12 minutes before giving their verdict. Jacob's lawyer, George Joseph, was surprised at how quickly the trial wrapped up.
The trial went very smoothly. A lot of cooperation from the Crown, Mr. Kozak in this, who is a very experienced Crown and knowledgeable Crown. The evidence came out in the manner that we hoped it would come out and found our client not guilty.
Over the past 2 weeks, the judge and jury saw a number of people take the stand, including the accused. Jacob testified a physical altercation happened between him and Barney Beaver after Jacob walked in on him violating his passed-out girlfriend at the Victoria Inn. Beaver was found by hotel staff close to 13 hours later on the floor of his hotel room. He succumbed to his injuries 7 days later at the regional hospital. This is the final jury trial at the courthouse behind me before moving into the Consolidated Courthouse April 7th. Justice Terrence Platana told the courtroom they were all part of history these past 2 weeks, but according to Joseph, it was a historic day for his client.
This particular courthouse has a lot of history to it, and I was glad to be part of that history, and I'm glad that everything worked out for Mr. Jacob.
Courtney Rutherford, TBT News.
We've been covering the proposed Energy East pipeline in Kenora, Thunder Bay, and Treaty 3 territory. After the break, Northwest Newsweek features discussions on the oil and gas pipes. Welcome back. Well, TransCanada Pipelines is looking to convert a natural gas pipeline to carry crude oil across Canada. And the consultation process hit the Northwest this week. We'll have more on the discussions that took place in Thunder Bay and Treaty 3, but first we head to Kenora for their meeting on Tuesday. Jonathan Wilson reports.
There were diverse opinions on the proposed Energy East oil pipeline at the Ontario Energy Board open house in Kenora, but most of the comments at the meeting were like this.
Shame on you that you didn't show up here with already a report on the environment.
Looks like we have very little economic benefit.
I oppose the pipeline, and I'm going to do everything in my power to mobilize.
Kenora marked the first stop on the OEB's tour along the natural gas line that TransCanada Pipelines intends to convert to a conduit for 1.1 million barrels of crude oil from the prairies to refineries in eastern Canada. 2 of the 6 civilian presentations spoke in favor of the project, but over 3 hours there was no support from the floor. The Northwestern Ontario Municipal Association has officially endorsed the idea. Speaking as a private citizen, Kenora Councillor Rod McKay said pipeline transportation is far safer than putting oil on the rails.
I think we should get the pipeline through. I think it's a much more safe environmental option than we currently have with the rail cars. Those rail cars cross every crossing that the pipeline will cross on railroads and trestles, and we know how many accidents there is in rail versus pipelines, and the amount of fluid gets spilled on rails is certainly a lot higher than a pipeline.
Transition Initiative Kenora is a new organization looking into local transition from fossil fuels to alternative energy. Tika Newton spoke on their behalf, expressing not only environmental concerns, but caution over the pipeline as a matter of national energy security.
It's not good energy policy for our country. It's not good economic policy. We need to be engaged in a much larger national level discussion about where we want to be 10, 20, 30, 50 years down the road. We don't want to be denuded of all our basic raw resources, particularly not fossil energy, which is so precious and not renewable. Like, once that's gone, that's gone. We should not be selling it off to the highest bidder as quickly as possible, because that leaves us bankrupt.
There are currently 4 lines running across northern Ontario, and according to TransCanada, explosions in Vermilion Bay and Beardmore over the last decade were not on the line it intends to convert. As for the Ontario Energy Board, it will return to the communities on the tour with answers to questions it has heard, and ultimately will deliver a report to the Minister of Energy on political feasibility of the project. Jonathan Wilson, TBT News.
That plan to convert a natural gas pipeline to carry crude oil is already creating quite a discussion across the country, and the region's largest city was no exception. Dennis Ward reports.
TransCanada wants to take roughly 3,000 kilometers of existing natural gas pipeline in Canada and convert the line to transport crude oil from Alberta to Quebec and New Brunswick. The line that physically splits northwestern Ontario in two also has created divisions and opinions over the project. Paul Berger of the Citizens United for a Sustainable Planet is worried about the environmental implications.
The pipeline will leak. We know it will leak. We know from TransCanada's record and from pipeline safety in Canada in general that this pipeline at some point will leak. It's an old pipeline. It's going to be carrying diluted bitumen that it wasn't designed for under high pressure at high flow rates. We know it's going to leak. We don't know when and we don't know where.
Tyler Madigan is the vice president of Summit Pipeline, a local company that does a lot of business with TransCanada. He says there will always be environmental concerns, but feels a pipeline is the safest way to transport oil.
It's staggering how many rail cars or how many transport trucks it would require to move the same volume of oil that we would move through this pipeline. And I mean, the safety statistics of a pipeline versus transport or rail, they're not comparable.
A study conducted for TransCanada says the $12 billion project will create thousands of jobs, but just how much employment will be generated in the Northwest is also a matter of opinion.
Locally, it's going to be a huge project. It's going to provide employment opportunities for lots of the local tradesmen and a real boost to our local construction economy in a time when it could use it.
There would be a small number of jobs created as they build new pumping stations. Those pumping stations will be monitored from Calgary, so those jobs will all go away. The biggest job boom here will be when it leaks, and then we have people hired to clean it up, and that's a really bad job creation plan.
There was a lot of feedback coming from people in this packed room, all of it being compiled by the Ontario Energy Board and will be passed on to the Minister of Energy to help formulate the province's position on the project. Another meeting will be held in Thunder Bay by the OEB this summer. Dennis Ward, TBT News.
Well, industrial projects like the Energy East pipeline have always been implemented with limited to no accommodation with First Nations. But that won't be the case this time. The Treaty 3 resource law is beginning to change the way business is done in that territory. John Thompson has that angle for us tonight.
In Treaty 3, it's known as Menituiki-Nakwinigewin, the resource law. And the alternative structure to Ontario's First Nations consultation approach has been applied in a series of different ways across the territory. And as a common approach emerges, chiefs gathered this week to discuss their experiences. Chief Arnold Gardner hosted the conference in his community of Eagle Lake. He says beyond token jobs, his community has experienced deforestation and the loss of wildlife, but has never once been part of the process or received the benefits of development. He foresees billions of dollars of development over the next decade in Treaty 3 and says this time things are going to be different.
Repetitive way of development, it's not going to happen the same way. We got something that we want to say from here on in. There's no question in my mind. And certainly the youth understand this, and they're going to start speaking up. We have a lot of educated environmentalists, educated lawyers, teachers, you name it. We have them now. They're thinking different. And along with a lot of the teachings that they've gotten from the elders of looking after the land. Like, it's not all about money.
Treaty 3 Grand Chief Warren White is calling on developers to dismiss the Ontario consultation protocols and contact the Grand Council directly. He cited New Gold's Rainy River project as one that is being held up because 5 First Nations that would be directly impacted were not at the table.
New Gold, I believe, again, if they would have followed a strict resource law process, or Menituiki-Nakwinigewin, we would have identified the correct communities. Right now, there's communities that are directly impacted, but were never identified by the Ontario government.
Over the coming months, Treaty 3 intends to sign a memorandum of understanding that will bring the resource law process to its highest profile yet. It will be the process under which TransCanada will consult and accommodate on its Energy East pipeline.
There is a draft agreement ready to go, but we need to be careful and sign the agreement in a traditional protocol process.
Fawn Wapioke was elected last week as the first female chief in the history of Shoal Lake 39 First Nation. The community has been in conflict on its traditional territory over mining, highway twinning, forestry, tourism, and water. The city of Winnipeg stated its concerns this week over the safety of Shoal Lake under the Energy East proposal, as it pumps its tap water from there. Under Wapioke, resource development needs need to be decided from the ground up.
I mean, it's something that Anishinaabe people each have that right to speak on behalf of. So it's really important to bring our community together to really, as a nation, answer those questions together. And that's really how I see my role, is to facilitate those and take all of those ideas and thoughts and beliefs and values and represent those the best way that I can.
The resource law has a higher calling yet. The Supreme Court of Canada announced this week that it would allow Grand Council Treaty 3 to intervene in the Keewatin case that will determine whether Ontario has the right to allocate forestry permits in the Whiskey Jack Forest north of Kenora. White says he will personally advocate that Grassy Narrows First Nation, whose members have blockaded logging trucks for over a decade, has not been consulted by the traditional protocols of Treaty 3. John Thompson, TBT News.
Stay with us after the break. A surprising new statistic on the number of children on subsidized daycare lists. That story when we return. Welcome back. Well, it looks as though the number of children on a wait list for subsidized daycare has been grossly exaggerated. The wait list for child care services under the Thunder Bay District Social Services Board may be half of what was once believed. Dennis Ward has a wrap-up on the DSAB's meeting, including an item nobody wanted to discuss.
Members of the District Social Services Board have been informed of glitches that are boosting the number of kids on the wait list for childcare. A combination of software and human error has led to some children showing up on the list as many as 60 times. DSAB CAO Bill Bradica says the numbers are not at all accurate.
We were showing to the board at one point around 2,200, and it's certainly nowhere near that. And we don't have a final figure yet. We're in the process of verifying the numbers, and we're thinking it's probably going to come in about half of that.
The board also received an update on commercial leases and some of the housing operations. Some of the properties have businesses in them like beauty salons, doctor's offices, and senior centers. But the rent charged hasn't changed since the day the leases were first signed, and in one case has remained the same for 40 years. The plan is to gradually bring the rent up to current market value.
It's going to more than double that 64,000. And, given the economic climate we're in, the Housing Corporation needs as much in revenue as needed in order to maintain these buildings properly.
Something not discussed by the board today was a letter received from the Area 1 municipalities. Those are the smaller communities that surround Thunder Bay that are trying to break away from the DSAB and create their own social services board. They recently met with the minister. However, it doesn't appear the government wants to make a decision on this anytime soon.
Political atmosphere right now could be one thing. He did indicate in a conversation with Mayor Kloosterhuis that there was concern regarding the financial fallout to the remaining municipalities if we were to pull out. But it's our position that we're taking this step and we're taking this approach because of the financial hardship being placed on our municipalities right now. So the argument doesn't really hold a lot of water with me.
Those 6 communities have formed the Lakehead Rural Municipal Committee to not only take up the DSAB issue, but new OPP policing costs and other common concerns. Dennis Ward, TVT News.
Thank you for joining me this evening. We'll see you next week.